guest here today is columnist Kacper Kita. Hello and welcome to TVP World. Would you say that it is a realistic prospect to think that Emmanuel Macron's gamble might fail and that we might be seeing a far-right coalition taking power in France following the elections?
Well, it is entirely possible, but we have to also take into consideration that, well, I think Macron has taken into account this possible scenario. I think that obviously he would prefer that not to happen. He would prefer Le Pen not to gain a majority. He would prefer himself to control the government. But we have to remember that Macron may also think that perhaps it is better for Le Pen to take over the government, for her candidate Jordan Bardella to become prime minister for some time now, than for her to gain popularity in the opposition without taking responsibility and then win over both the presidency and the parliament in 2027. So I think that when we speak of Macron's gamble, we have to also take into account this scenario, which would repeat what François Mitterrand did in 1986, when he also, for the first time, we had cohabitation, president and prime minister from different parties, and then he allowed Jacques Chirac, the then leader of the centre-right Gaullists, to become prime minister, and then Chirac governed for 2 years, and he took on some heat for governing, for some difficult decisions, and then it was Mitterrand who won the presidency in a direct battle with Chirac 2 years later. I think that Macron also thinks that perhaps if Bardella becomes prime minister for at least a year, because after a year Macron can also dissolve the parliament for another time, or for 2.5 years until the next presidential election, then perhaps they will lose popularity. It will become clear that their solutions are not that easy to implement, that it's easier to criticize from the opposition benches than to actually govern. But obviously we will see. It's still certain. It's still very very uncertain that they will actually have the majority, and what will happen if they do not have a majority is also quite unclear. But well, we will see. I think that Macron has different scenarios on his table.
So perhaps now speculating a bit and assuming that they would take the majority, what strategies do you think can Le Pen employ to now overcome the challenges posed by the coalition building and the Republican front?
Well, Macron is the one who will nominate the prime minister. We have to remember that in France, the prime ministers and the ministers are nominated by the president. They do not de facto need a vote of confidence in the National Assembly. So, but Macron has made it clear that well, if a candidate will win an outright majority, like Bardella may win, then he will make him prime minister. Marine Le Pen for many years has been gradually de-diabolizing herself, normalizing herself, by both in terms of her actual program, with making it more mild and with making it less radical in some measures, and also I think very much in terms of the form of her presenting her agenda. She's been quite good at presenting herself as someone who is actually a nice, warm, middle-aged auntie who cares very much about common folk, and defends the small common people against the rich, against international lobbies and international institutions and stuff like that. And also I think that Marine Le Pen very much benefits from the fact that and we have to remember that we do not have two actors, Macron versus Le Pen and their camps, but we also have the left. And Le Pen has been very good at also presenting herself as the alternative to the left, and presenting the most radical elements of the left, namely Jean-Luc Mélenchon, as him being the radical, him being the anti-Semite, him being the extremist that needs to be contained herself, as she put it in Le Figaro interview last week, herself being for order and peace.
All right, so nobody wants to be perceived as a radical. One quick question. According to the latest polls, social issues are at the top of the agenda of what French voters believe to be the most important. Foreign policy taking the last spot, less than 4% compared to over 30% when it comes to social issues. Does it surprise you? Because, from our perspective, we tend to focus on foreign policy.
Well, I think that it doesn't surprise me because also foreign policy is the area that for which Macron is rated the most highly by the French society. When you look at detailed polls in which areas, how do you rate the president? Foreign policy is where Macron is rated the best. And I think also foreign policy is where there's to a degree, of course, some consensus in terms that the strategic autonomy, the need for France to be an active player, having good relations both with America and China, India, and also France rebuilding its military capabilities. This is all things that the biggest players agree on in French politics. Obviously, they do disagree on sending troops to Ukraine. They do disagree on the European integration. But foreign policy is an area where there is some consensus, and there's, I think, I would say, less emotion, less tension in the French debate than it is in other issues like economy, social issues, immigration. These are topics where it's very deep divisions and not much consensus.
So a degree of agreement there, even though foreign policy, even though hugely important, remains, as it seems, criminally underrated among domestic voters. But it seems to be a pattern that we're seeing in other countries as well. Kacper Kita was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us.